The persecution we face today is quite similar, if not worse, but we may not feel this directly since we're actually living in a country that has complete freedom of religion. If anything, I actually think we are in a deeper crisis in our faith today. And I would call this because of religious mannerism. We have lost all the excitement, enthusiasm, joy, the mere realization of how grateful we are to be invited to give praise to our Lord, the little details on how life persists throughout our world in various forms of biological creatures God created. The most surprising of all is that we are actually breathing in oxygen at this very given moment, and all the complex biological reactions happening in our body, so that we can see each other through another complex machinery called a computer that us human beings have built. But the mere joy of being able to still worship our God and fellowship with each other, maybe we are taking things for granted so easily, that I would call is the biggest crisis that we are facing today in Christian faith. You might say, well, I got so much things to do, or else I will fall behind. I need to compete in this world to survive. Sorry, Solomons, facts are facts. It's the survival of the fittest. And you may say these things to me, and yes, these indeed are the principles of the world that we are in today. But let me just give you a real practical example. One virus that has mutated dropped into this world, and here we are. These principles don't matter at all anymore in front of this virus. It's really all about perspective. And as Christians, I think we have something to learn today from this passage. And I think today's passage tells us about the very essence of our faith. What is our true identity as Christians? Because that's what brought these early Christians all the outside persecutions that they were facing at this time. So if we can understand what this identity is, and kindly enough, Jesus himself tells us what that identity is today, we can probably have a different perspective in our life. The identity of a Christian is boldly stated by Jesus in verses 14 and 16. He states, "We are not of the world." And yes, Jesus actually said that. So it's quite interesting, especially the teachings on the Christian worldview that I received personally from the vision that Sallims Christian Church has, is that we should actually actively fight against this whole idea that the world is evil and only the church activities are holy, a terminology called religious dualism. And we stand against that. And we as Christians must be part of the world so that we can transform it. And yes, I totally agree with this. And probably Jesus is not talking about dualism here. If you read carefully, there's always a presupposition to this saying, and that is, as if I am not of the world, is what Jesus says. So the correct verse is, they are not of the world, even as I am not of it. So indeed, Jesus is not of the world, as he was actually risen and defeated what we all face as human beings, that is death. Today's parallel lectionary passage is actually first chapter of Acts, where it describes how Jesus was lifted up into the sky and the clouds took him out of the sight of the apostles. I think it's a perfect passage to describe the identity of Jesus Christ. And we are actually followers of him, who believe that on the last day, we will actually be transformed into something beyond our comprehension at this moment. And as a scientist, I don't know what that will be in terms of biological or even chemical composition. I don't know how we're going to change. But we know, because Jesus himself has shown us, that it'll be a completely different existence compared to what this world has to offer to us at this moment. And of course, this belief we have will be persecuted consistently, just like how the early Christians were under the Roman Empire. We are under the influence of ideologies today, forcing us to believe and absolutize our principles of life on materialistic views, infinite competition throughout life, political game playing in the midst of a major crisis such as this viral outbreak like we are facing now. And I believe what Jesus is saying here is that as he transcended such worldviews, we as believers must have the courage to transcend them too. But Jesus doesn't stop here today. Transcending today's worldview doesn't mean that we all have to become monks and live in small villages away from the active world. He actually states in verse 18 that as you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. It sounds pretty paradoxical, but that is our true existence. That is stated today in the Bible. This is not something that I'm making up. A disciple that transcends today's worldview, but whom has to be thrown into today's world. And we are actually thrown into this world. We are probably doing very well on the latter part as noble citizens in our society. Wherever we are, hardworking people who give it their best at each of our workplaces, driving the economy, being polite to a certain degree to each other. But we must not forget the very essence of our identity as well that precedes our very existence of being in the world. That is, we believe in this beyond comprehensible dimension that is out of this world, that one day we will all arrive. I cannot speak what that is, but we believe in that. We have given our life towards that belief, and that's why we are called Christians. And if we live our everyday life as a believer, perhaps suffering and persecution from the outside will become such a small thing compared to what is waiting for us at the end of our lives. But the more important thing is that by this, we become better Christians as well, because we do not dwell or absolutize ideas that the world forces us to stand by. That's when we can throw away our lives to save another life or soul, a real caring and sympathy for the sick and abandoned, all the visions that we all have as Sallims Christian Church members. Amen.